Hello, my name is Sharon Eastvold, and I do thread painting. I'm hoping this little video will help you feel validated in your efforts to do thread painting more, or give you the sense of courage you might need to give it a try. I began with a memory quilt years ago, and I'll show you my progression from a technique I used early on, which I have since abandoned for a lot simpler technique. Um, Thread painting involves a machine where you can lower your feed dogs and use what's called a free motion foot. And all you do is put the setting on zigzag and narrow it down and tighten it up, and you're ready to go. So at the very end, I'll demonstrate exactly how I do thread painting, but in the beginning here, I'd like to just show you um, different ways you can do thread painting. So I hope you find this helpful. The first thing I did when I retired in 2015 is decide to make my very first ever quilt. And of course, it was a queen size quilt, but I decided to do a memory quilt. So this first photograph is from Johns Canyon, Utah. And when I go to make a design, I look at those basic shapes and I can either draw them out separately on paper or just start cutting scraps of fabric to outline the shapes. I look at the talus slopes coming down from those huge bluffs and mesas and how they interweave and reach out for each other and then go back into a flat mesa toward the back there. And then there was a lovely cloud cover behind there. So I looked for fabric that kind of echoed that cloud texture. So here you see how I've used kind of a speckly fabric for the talus slopes, and I've alternated it with a solid to accentuate the different layers in the distance, and then used a different color in the background for that final mesa, and then this lovely tie-dyed material for the sky, giving an effect of clouds in the distance. So in this case, I've used thread painting to create a grassy texture in the green areas and just outline the various edges of the talus slope, and in creating the talus by using these lines that come down from the cliff face itself. And then I thread painted along the edges in darker shades and allowed the bluff to stand out more. This next photograph is another area in Utah. We took a lot of classes up there. My husband would teach courses in rock art up there. This is Twin Buttes, I believe, and there's a pond underneath that have prawn, and the prawn will bite you if you take a dip there, so we called it Piranha Lake. Anyway, you see the landforms that I used and cut out using the same fabric as the previous one, and then I used eyelet for the clouds, which I thought made a nice contrast. And the sky here is a denim that had very fine flower designs done in white that just made a nice cloud pattern for me. So once again, I've used thread painting to simply accentuate the textures in the background, accentuate the grass, create some taller bushes coming up in front, and then I just appliqued the edges of the clouds because I wanted to keep that eyelet. Once I finished the quilt itself, I decided to add all the pets we've had during our many years of marriage, and the last one to pass away just after I retired was our lovely shepherd mix named Bella. So once again, I cut out all these little pieces that define the features of her face, and then I layered colored thread on her face to accentuate those wonderfully loving, expressive eyes that I still miss today. So one color after another, I start with what's in the background and come forward, and then the eyes came out, I think, particularly well. Very expressive, and I have to tell you, it was quite thick by the time I was done. And that's another thing, you have to put some fabric thickener on the background so that your fabric doesn't pucker too much when you're working on it. So I finished this and then put that on a pillow sham that has become the centerpiece for the quilt. So here's a little quick tour of the memory quilt. My birthday is in May and my husband's is in winter, so I started with spring colors, spring summer colors at the top, came through autumn, and end up with winter in his old Pendleton shirts around the bottom, and the tour of all the places that we've loved, from Utah to the Taos Gorge area to Arizona, and then ended with making shams of, from left to right, that Squeaky, Dodger, Woody, and Doobie, and Bella in the center. And you see how it goes down to winter colors at the bottom. So this is a video I made some years ago of a thread painting I did of this handsome boy, Billy Bob. He passed away in 2017. So I start with a grayscale photograph to help me find those landmark shapes. And then I cut those out and fuse them together. As you can see, then I set my sewing machine up with a free motion foot, and I adjust my width and spacing on my sewing machine using a zigzag stitch. And on my Genome, the feed dogs lever are in the back, and I move it to the left in order to drop them down. And then I work in layers, and I work from side to side, which is why you don't want the feed dogs in your way. You can see the different colors that I'm adding from the back toward the front, and each layer adds more definition and precision to the artwork. And white always makes things sparkle, and black always defines your edges and really brings things out. Billy Bob was a challenge because of his multicolored coat, but I'm very pleased, and my friends were quite pleased with this, how this came out. So I took Billy Bob, and I had a photograph of him on his favorite blanket, and so I took a look at that blanket, which was a like a granny quilt, and so I took that granny quilt and made a little patchwork quilt of it, and I attached Billy Bob to the center of the purple all around his edges, and that covers the fusion material, and it just kind of helps him settle into the fabric background. And then I did a little fancy stitch to look like the folds of his blanket. And then this is how he looks as a wall hanging. You can see I'm a little wobbly there. This is a fairly early project. And what he ended up being is a pillow. My friends enjoyed him as a pillow. They could pretend he still had the cat without having the mouse. Now, this project I called Phoebe Dreaming. We had a nest of Say's Phoebes survive on our porch. 4 of them survived, and I took progressive photographs, I just did drawings here. I just drew, you can see some of the pencil lines here. So I drew each one, and I thread painted each photograph, and then I fused them onto some gray flannel, and I built a little nest out of fabric strips. And now you see the progression of the chicks as they go from egg to hatchling to hungry baby to making their own flight. And so I call this Phoebe Dreaming. It hangs in my hallway and inspires my husband to keep working on his recovery. This next one is what I call Raising Junior. It's our iconic sandhill crane. And I used color markers there to help me find my areas, and zigzagged and thread painted the bird itself, but then I used textured fabric for the background. Next, I'm going to actually show you how I do thread painting. So I've lowered the feed dogs, I've set my stitch for zigzag, I've narrowed the stitch, and I've made it close together, And I've had to remove the free motion foot to get this, my grandmother's embroidery hoop, in there. It works better than the ones that come with the sewing machine because I'm using fabric plus a fabric stiffener. You don't want your fabric to pucker, so you want it nice and firm. So I've drawn a leaf pattern on the fabric. It's a lot easier than all that cutting and fusing. It also doesn't gum up my machine. And I work around the edge, and I just keep going back and forth until I fill in the first layer of thread. And as you've seen on my other illustrations, once that first layer's down, then I come forward and add shadows and detail and depth, or a little shine with white. So this first leaf is nearly finished, and once it's done, I'll show you a nice up-close picture of it. I use Isaac cord thread. It's got a nice shine, which you'll see in here in just a minute. So back and forth, back and forth. In the end, it's okay to scribble because nobody's going to notice, but if you're working on the definitive edges, you want to be very careful. Now, if you're working on larger pieces, then you're going to have to do some crisscrossing of fabric thickening material on the back, and then you'd use your nice rubberized gloves and work it back and forth that way. I'll show you what I did and one last piece here in a little bit. So there's the leaf, and you see how it's catching the shine on that Isaac cord. Here's a pair of Pyroluxia. Those are southwestern cardinals, if you haven't heard of them before. And we enjoyed them down in southern New Mexico, so I made my dulcimer practice bench pillows and put some Pyroluxias thread painted on there just for the fun of it. They are wonderful little birds. The last thing I'd like to share with you is a piece I call Foggy River. And it's a combination of using the texture of fabric with some quilting techniques I've learned over the years, as well as a little thread painting to accentuate things here and there. I used free motion arm quilting using the pattern already printed on the fabric, and then some thread painting to accentuate the division between the sky and the water. This was a photo taken by a friend of mine down in Truth or Consequences, a rare morning of fog on the river. And so this is the piece I'll leave you with today. I'd also encourage you to visit my website. That's www.dulciartstore.art, and I have a studio on spoonflower.com under Dulcie Art LLC, and I would love it if you would view my gallery of digital designs and use some of my fabric designs for your next project. There's plenty of things you could use for thread painting or just have fun with. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share my thread painting skills with you. I hope you are inspired to try something of your own. Good luck and enjoy.